I'm Tom Porter, Supervising Technical Director on Monsters Incorporated.
Hi, my name is Steve May. I was a Simulation and Effects Sequence Supervisor.
Hi, I'm Michael Fong. I'm a Sequence Supervisor for Monsters Incorporated. So part of the character making process involves building stand-in models or test models. And in our case here, we have Johnson, the test model for eventually what would become Sullivan.
The art direction of this film was obviously diverging very far from the sort of suburban look of Toy Story and Toy Story 2. We had to define an entire monster world, and I thought it very important to be able to create 3D animation right off the bat to see whether the sort of direction we were going in with the pre-production art was what we wanted to do. So we put together this little conversation between Mike and Sullivan. Obviously, Mike here went through a phase where he had no arms. We wanted to see whether the animators could get an expressive character dealing only with his legs as the only appendage. I actually thought it was quite successful, but of course, in the end, we attached arms to Mike. There were a lot of issues on these early tests that we undertook. Here, we're looking at Sullivan with tentacles. One of the obvious questions was whether you even wanted to commit to a main character walking with tentacles over the course of a 2-hour film. In the end, we rejected the idea, I think largely because the audience's eyes were commonly looking at the tentacles at a time when they should have been looking at Sullivan's face. Here is Sullivan close to his final form with the first hair test that convinced us we were definitely on the right track. This was a high point in the hair investigation.
So here we have another test version of Sullivan. This one is Mulligan.
We did a lot of animation tests to make sure that the fur held up in a variety of situations. We were really concerned about various actions and poses that the character could go through. The fur is a fairly complicated process. The hairs are moved by a computer program, and that means that each one of those hairs is somewhat out of our control. So we had to make sure that that software worked really, really well. And the only way to do that was to run Sullivan through every kind of test we could think of until we kind of solved every little hitch and problem that could come up over the course of a film.
The directors had this idea at one point that Sullivan would wear glasses throughout the film. This is a dangerous sort of idea. Pixar animation in general is very careful to make sure that the eyes of the character are perfectly readable. The eyes turn out to be a very clear way of expressing the personality of any character. The decision to put glasses on Sullivan meant that perhaps the eyes wouldn't be as readable.
These are facial tests. We decided that his fur should be non-dynamic so that it didn't move in distracting ways in the area that we always focus on, which is the face of the character. For a while, Sullivan had a really thick coat of hair on his back. It was like a different color and a different thickness to the hair. It was an interesting test, but eventually we did away with that idea. One of the ways that we made development of the fur easier was we built a really simple model dubbed the hairball. And we started out with a kind of clean fur look. And then we tried some more extreme cases where we made the hair look like it was wet and slimy, or where it looked like it was made out of kind of braided or corded hair. Eventually, Pete and Bob Polly grew attached to the hairball that we used for doing the fur tests, and we made some monsters with it. We added tentacles or legs, or in some cases arms, and generated a hair scare and some other background monsters for the movie. This shot really scared me to death. This is the kind of shot that, as an effects artist, that makes the sweat roll down your forehead and makes your heart beat fast. These tests show the process that we took of the shot as it moved from animation, where the ground is just a kind of a flat plane and his body just intersects it. And then it shows how we simulated the fur to show the effect of the wind that would later also drive the snow that we would show in these shots. The snow is actually done in several layers. There's the really fine, powdery snow that kicks up when he hits it first. There was a level of chunky snow that made these kind of large pieces of snow that would fly out in front of him and actually impact on the ground. And then there was some very, very, very fine powdery snow that almost looked like a soft cloud. And this is in addition to the snow that's just going to be falling down from the sky. This is the final version of the shot. This has all the effects elements added together, and probably the most important element was the snow and the fur. In the end, we modified the way that the fur software worked so that we could add things into his hair. As each hair is grown, We take into account a number of factors, how long he's been out in the snow, what direction the wind is blowing, etc., to determine the likelihood that snowflakes will occur on certain parts of his fur. And for that shot, in the end, we ended up with over 1 million individual snowflakes.
So once again, we've gone back to earlier tests of Sullivan. In this case here, we were testing how Sullivan's fur would react to like wind forces. The main thing we were focusing on here was the nozzle in the back spraying over his shoulder, and would it make the fur look like it was reacting to this burst of wind coming out?
We did several tests to just show the general motion of his fur. So we had Sullivan run, jog, walk, jump in place, scratch his chest. And the whole idea here was just to make sure that the fur looked like it had the weight of like a real animal's fur would have. We did a lot of tests for Sullivan. One way we tested his fur was to basically build an obstacle course and then run him through it. When we first ran this test with the fur, it didn't go so well. His fur got caught in some of the objects that it was supposed to respond with. It stretched a lot because of the extreme amount of motion. We did another test, you see here. We got kind of a case of fur mange, where his skin is poking through. But in the end, we solved the problems with the fur with the help of our tools department. And we were able to actually run Sullivan through the obstacle course without any problems occurring.
This test was done in order to look at the relative size of Boo and Sullivan and to ask ourselves whether camera placement would be an issue when you've got an 8-foot-tall Sullivan dealing with such a small child. With this film, we knew we had one of the main characters, Boo, wearing a T-shirt throughout most of the film. And our feeling was that the sort of movement of the fabric had really nothing to do with personality or emotion. And what we wanted to do was to allow the animators to express cuteness, emotion, and personality while not worrying about the fabric. We built a simulator in order to drape the T-shirt on the Boo character. So Boo would get animated over in the animation department. They'd pass it along to the simulation department, which would drape the fabric. Even when the simulation is done, it turns out to be a very difficult problem to figure out what 100% cotton looks like. There's a huge difference between how burlap reacts and how silk reacts, as an example. And we did a number of animations in order to see what this cotton T-shirt should look like. We hired a tailor from San Francisco to come in a few times. He would look at them, say, oh, you've got a little bulging under the arm, you need to take it in a little bit. We would do as he suggested, rerun the animation, invite him back a week later, and sure enough, the animations looked a lot better. The T-shirt fit a lot better. By the end of production, that simulator worked wonderfully.